This is the 747 Jumbo, the world's fastest subsonic jetliner. But all planes grow old, and now this one must be scrapped.
Go ahead and shut everything down. I'm going to close the valve.
All 6 million parts.
There's still more to go.
And 66 tons of high-strength aluminum. The mechanics must recycle as much as possible to recoup $6.8 million. But it's their first 747 teardown. And doing it right
Go. Come on.
is a jumbo-sized challenge. They'll risk their lives moving pieces as large as cars in scorching temperatures to break it down. This 747 Jumbo is on its last flight. It's an old player in the game of air travel, and now it must retire. Time for one final touchdown. Over the past 24 years, this plane has flown enough to circle the world 1,200 times. Now, it's arrived at a desert tarmac in Goodyear, Arizona. This is the home of Aero Turbine, a company that specializes in all things aircraft.
Let's go ahead and prep these.
Roger Hodges is the maintenance manager. Usually he repairs aircraft, but this one is different for one good reason.
It's worth more dead than alive.
So basically,
This 747 is now beyond repair. It's old and too expensive to maintain. But rather than trash it, Roger will make sure it's carefully pulled apart, piece by piece.
Just like cars or anything else aren't going to last forever. There's still many parts within the airframe and engines that are worth sending to overhaul. 30% of this airplane will be utilized in future 747s.
The Jumbo's parts are so interchangeable because the plane's basic design has changed little since its first commercial flight in 1970. Back then, it took several hundred people and 4 months to make a plane. Now, just a handful of mechanics will attempt to tear one apart in only 12 weeks. Among them, Derek Pfeiffer. He runs the crew from the ground.
We'll get in there with a ratchet and a socket and get them out.
Lyle Bonebrake is in charge of snakes on this plane. While Pete Faulkner will try to dodge them.
That was good. That was Jesus.
All are experts in their own right. Only one problem. None of them have ever pulled apart an aircraft this big. This is a first.
The Boeing 747 is the biggest aircraft we had to tear down so far. All right, you ready?
It's by far maybe the biggest challenge.
It's just huge. We don't want to damage it. We don't want to get hurt.
Everything they do will be a learning experience. They must rely heavily on the manuals that were used to build this plane more than 2 decades ago.
Big parts. Everything's like 4 to 5 times heavier than we're accustomed to. Takes tooling, takes slings to be able to handle that kind of weight. See that junk in the back?
It'll be a 4-step process. First, workers must gently remove the engines, 4 elephant-sized jets, to be handled like eggs.
Down a little bit. Go.
Second, they must remove and inventory any resellable item, from piping to coffee makers.
65 Bravo, 9-4.
All can return to service on other aircraft.
Over there. You ready?
Third, They must extract hazardous material, like depleted uranium, and take it to a safe location. Workers will also strip and trash anything else of little value, like worn seat covers and insulation. Finally, they must crush the remaining metal so it can be melted into solid bars of aluminum. And from there, made into other objects like electronics, hardware, even furniture. The aim is to recycle an incredible 98% of the aircraft and reclaim spare parts and scrap worth about $6.8 million. The team starts by detaching the biggest and most valuable items, the 4 engines, each weighing 5.4 tons. An engine can cost $5 million. Even these second-hand engines, if carefully removed, can still fetch $1.5 million each.
This particular airplane, it arrived, the engines were sold when it came here. So, of course, that was the first thing. They're in high demand.
The new owner wants the engines back in service without delay.
We just try to do it, in a timely manner, and just as long as everybody's safe.
The team is on the clock. 2 engines are mounted under each wing. They are the muscles that propel this beast. In flight, they power the 747 to speeds upward of 900 kilometers per hour.
Start loosening up the bolts.
To remove them, mechanics must essentially disconnect 2 systems.
Okay, you can come down.
At lower altitudes, where the air is thicker, 38 internal fan blades drive a turbofan system. But at high altitudes, the air is too thin for the fans to work alone. A core compressor takes over. It sucks air into the opening and compresses it so it's under pressure, like the air that blows up car tires. The compressed air mixes with the fuel. This combination is ignited to create the combustion that propels the airplane. The mechanics must disconnect the 2 systems that drive each engine and lower them all in one piece. And they must do it fast for the new owner. They clip 16 electrical connectors, detach 3 hydraulic lines,
10-4, thank you.
cap the main fuel supply, and undo 375 fasteners. One wrong move and someone could be killed. No one understands that more than mechanic Dean Klepper.
Well, if it comes forward, it might come forward.
It's very dangerous work. Aircraft shift can knock you over. When you're running engines, you can be sucked in, blown over. The industry is very dangerous.
Dean's brother was also an aircraft mechanic. In 2003, Rick Klepper was crushed when an engine slipped from a forklift.
The motor all disconnected. They were backing the engine away on a forklift. Cable got hung up. The engine put a little tension on the cable. The forklift swung the engine forward, pinned my brother against the aircraft. It ruptured his heart and 1 lung, and he died right on the spot.
Dean keeps a picture of Rick on the back of his ID badge. A close reminder for everyone to watch their step.
But you gotta watch this indicator on the front. You can't go past the 30 degrees.
It takes 3 mechanics about 4 hours to prepare an engine for removal.
So hold on. Out. Loosen up a little bit.
They hook up the hoist kit to support the first engine.
All right, I'm gonna pull down a little bit, all right? So hold on. Out.
A slip with a 5.4-ton engine could be catastrophic.
Loosen up a little bit. Down. The front. Yeah.
And they have 4 of these giants to get down.
So we can come up even.
Getting a 747's engine safely to the ground requires a team effort.
Howard, I'm gonna pull down a little bit, all right? All right, Howard. That'll work. right, now hold up.
44? That's about good.
Come down a little bit.
The mouth of each engine yawns nearly 3 meters across.
These engines weigh like 11,500 pounds.
These tailor-made slings will catch and cradle the nearly 6-ton machines to ensure neither the engines nor the crew are damaged in the process.
We want the chain falls even, so when we get ready to come down with the engine don't try to swing on us.
Okay.
Finally, they gently lower the first engine. It takes a week for the mechanics to remove all the engines, but it's well worth it. The 4 engines will deliver a total of $6 million. But the job doesn't end here. To get the most from this aircraft, they still need to find another $800,000 in spare parts. Their next job is the new priority for cash and for safety. Inside each 747 wing sit 2 giant fuel tanks and a reserve tank. Each wing can hold 64,000 liters of fuel. A central tank under the seats holds an additional 64,000 liters. This aircraft arrived with its wing tanks about 20% full. They must be emptied now so the tanks have time to dry out. If the tanks aren't dry by the time workers demolish the fuselage, the plane could explode. This is no simple stop and pump operation. Access to this highly flammable liquid sits 9 meters in the air. Stephen Collins is specially trained for defueling aircraft.
All these airplanes that come in, we recycle all the fuel that comes off of them.
But this is Stephen's first 747, and there's a problem.
Dane, are you there?
Go ahead.
He can't get the fuel out.
We have no fuel movement down here.
He coordinates with mechanic Dane Zimmerman in the cockpit.
Go ahead and shut everything down. I'm going to close the valves.
The problem is a safety latch on the tank. It's unique to this type of plane, but an easy fix. And they finish extracting the fuel. $30,000 worth. Until this point, the plane has been operating on its own power. Now, that power must be shut off so electronics can be safely removed. It's a major step in the journey from aircraft to scrap.
Okay, fueling's done. We're gonna kill power.
Get my tools, pull out these instruments.
No power means no air conditioning for the crew working in the confined spaces of the aircraft's innards. Dane must remove more than 100 cockpit instruments. They're extremely fragile and must be taken out early on to reduce the chance of accidental damage. But now the temperature rises for every minute he's in the cabin.
This is the 22nd day this summer. The mercury will hit 110 degrees or more.
Teardowns normally take place in the hangar, but this jumbo is too jumbo to fit through the hangar doors.
That's double the number of super hot days Phoenix usually has.
The plane must stay out, and the crew must work in the heat. Outside, mechanics start to unscrew, unhook, and unfasten this 747 piece by piece. But soon, it's like pulling apart a furnace.
Take the airplane apart outside, this heat is draining and just draining us.
To beat the sun, the crew arrives at 5 a.m. But there's little relief, even at this hour.
And the thermometer already reads 99. It's gonna get much hotter.
The scorching heat makes the metal hot to touch and dangerous to work with. The real work has only just begun. This 747 bakes in the Arizona sun. The cabin becomes an oven. Dane Zimmerman keeps sweating to remove this old jumbo's cockpit gauges. But Dane's job is an important part of recycling this aircraft. Most, if not all, of these gauges will be recalibrated and sold. They'll still work on newer 747s and other aircraft. On the second-hand market, they'll fetch around $75,000. Those cockpit instruments sit in a location unique among aircraft, the second story. The 747 is the only passenger plane to have one. The aircraft can hold 175 cubic meters of cargo, or with seats, 452 passengers. In the 1970s, Boeing took the marketing of this spacious interior to new heights.
The Harlem Globetrotters would like to show you what the Boeing 747 is really all about. So welcome aboard the biggest, most luxurious plane in the sky, the 747, where you can move around with all the freedom in the world. Space like you've never known before. Headroom, legroom, elbow room.
A plane with an upstairs captured the public imagination.
You'll have a ball.
A lounge for first-class passengers.
Getting people together.
And of course, home to the highest cockpit mechanic Dane Zimmerman has ever tackled. The cockpit instruments are easy to reach. They are like the eyes and ears of the aircraft. But unhooking the brains of this plane presents more of a challenge. They sit below the cockpit, hidden in a 1x4 meter closet behind the nose and just below the first floor. This is the avionics bay. Avionics means aviation electronics. Fuel systems, flight controls, and communications instruments all run out of this small room. This is Dane's specialty.
Every box in here pretty much controls this aircraft from start to finish. The pilots like to think they do, but it's really these boxes. The big problem is getting them from up here to down there because they're so heavy. Usually it's a two-man job, sometimes three, depending on if your arms are long or not.
Handled properly, these instruments will live to see another day.
These boxes will be shipped out for overhaul, and then they can be used on other aircraft. And there's still more to go. Combined,
The boxes from the avionics bay are worth $100,000. 2 avionics devices to go. The plane's flight recorder and cockpit voice recorder, or the black boxes, have their own special location. These boxes record flight information and the pilot's voice to help those investigating any mishap. They sit above the passenger's cabin in the back of the aircraft, a section engineers have deemed more likely to survive a major accident. Surprisingly, the so-called black boxes aren't black.
These are the infamous black boxes. As you can see, they're painted orange, which is always kind of funny. But the reason for the color is so they can be found if an aircraft crashes.
The term black box comes from the general term for all avionics boxes. All the others are black. With the removal of these final 2 boxes, Dane's job inside the plane is done. But the removal of parts is only a portion of this enormous challenge. Keeping track of what's removed is a mind-boggling affair. Among the parts still to be salvaged, 8 kilometers of tubing, 275 kilometers of wiring, and 3 million fasteners. Much of which can be found here the belly of the beast. Hatches provide access to 4 spaces, each the size of a van, crammed with pipes and ducts. For the mechanics, it's like gutting a giant bird, but they must track every feather.
This is an air conditioning bay. This is one of the first areas we start in. And by the time we're done, it'll be completely empty.
Pete Faulkner is one of 5 mechanics who's on this job for the full 12 weeks.
It's just time, time consuming.
To get the most out of this old aircraft, recyclable parts must be taken off and correctly cataloged. But finding the part number can be as tricky as the removal itself.
But a lot of these parts with ducting, panels, various things like that, they can be worn off or they can be quite difficult. Most of them are usually worn off. They're only a stamp. Right there. There's the assembly number. 65 Bravo 94200.
The crew then records each part number on a tag.
As the parts are being removed, we have to fill out a removal tag. And what we do, we put the registration number, service number, the nomenclature of the part, and pretty much the part number, serial number. Then we tag the item and put it over in the cage over there so they can put it into the system. Usually we go around maybe 500 to 1,000 tags or more on this aircraft since it's such a big aircraft.
Once tagged, they take the pieces to aircraft inspector John Lister. John confirms the identity of each part removed from the airplane.
It's a big business. Just about every part that comes off an aircraft, just about every part can be refurbished and re-put on another aircraft.
From complex electronics to ducting, flight controls to hydraulic tubing, even the most commonplace items can have real value.
There's certain parts you might look at sitting on a shelf and say, who would ever want that and whatnot, but the fact that it come off of an aircraft, it has a value to it. Here's a coffee maker that's removed, and it's obviously seen better days. They will keep these things on the shelf with a fresh tag because coffee makers go out quite often. And there's nothing worse that a flight attendant hates when their coffee makers and their ovens and whatnot aren't working.
John's coffee maker could go for upward of $2,000. Parts that are regularly damaged are in high demand. That includes one of the most valuable sections on the Jumbo, its nose. The tip of the nose is called the radome. Each radome is specially made to protect the aircraft's weather radar. The antenna inside communicates weather systems to the pilot. It must withstand regular wind blasts over 800 kilometers an hour, faster than any hurricane. A used nose in good condition is a valuable part of any jet. But to tweak this bird's beak, mechanics must scale new heights, 3 stories up.
There's nothing on the 407 you can reach without a lift, some type of sling, lifting apparatus to get it off.
The nose is built to stick. Loosening each bolt around the cone is an awkward and tedious process. Opening this massive cowl requires yet another lift and a 3rd crew member. A fall from this height could be fatal, so everyone is strapped in.
You're tight off in there, but it's not stable. It does move around. You think something's falling and you automatically, it's just a little nerve-wracking at times. A lot of people can't take that. Don't like the height. I'm not real crazy about it myself.
Okay. All right, hold it. She's gonna start coming loose. All right. Good to go, though. Okay, Jeff? Yeah. Come down just a little bit.
They get the nose open, revealing the aircraft's weather radar worth $5,000. The antenna heads for the warehouse, and the team heads back up to finish the toughest part of the nose job, removing the cover entirely. The radome weighs 90 kilograms and measures about 2 meters across. To remove it, they must work as a team.
Holding up.
Just rotate it.
Yeah, it's just rotate. It's just bring it to me.
You guys ready?
Together, they bring it down safely.
Yep, look on the side.
The nose cone can be resold for $15,000. So far, mechanics pulling apart this old jumbo have given it a facelift, brain surgery, and a tummy tuck. Hundreds of kilograms have been shed, and this work pays for itself. They've put an estimated $6.5 million worth of parts back on the market. It's the first 747 they've ever tackled, but they know the real heavy lifting is about to begin. The wings of this 747 are massive structures, weighing over 20,000 kilograms each. You could park 22 medium-sized cars on the surface of just one. These wings have flown their last flight, but the devices that control the flaps are precious components called actuators. 2 major actuators sit in each wing. 4 more control the tail flaps, and 2 for the rudder. They weigh up to 90 kilograms each and are among the largest pieces the crew must remove. It's a daunting and dangerous mission 3 stories above the ground, and these mechanics have never dealt with actuators this big. The crew takes up position above and below a tail flap. To reach the actuator, they must first hoist up the flap. Problem is, it weighs 250 kilograms.
Okay, Howard. Let it down, Howard. You're gonna come back this way a ways.
I'm gonna be able to hold it.
The team hustles to force the actuator out, but it won't budge.
Okay, Willie.
Yeah.
You need to help me hold this for a little bit. Hold on to the rope. Or can you hold it for a second?
Yeah.
Someone must hold up the tail flap while the struggle continues.
Just gotta come aft still.
Brackets in the tail obstruct the actuator's path. They must somehow work around the brackets without damaging the actuator itself.
This way, we should hang a little bit of roll in it. We gotta do this out. You gotta come out about a minute.
You all right?
Okay, let's rest a little bit, okay?
They reposition for a better angle under the tail.
All right, onto it. We're gonna go all the way up again. Okay, ready?
All right, that's it. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Now we're gonna try it. Can you pull it up a little? Either way would work.
And continue the fight by working on their knees. Then, another serious setback. Lyle is sprayed by an airplane mechanic's worst nightmare, skydroll.
Just got doused with skydroll.
Skydroll is the hydraulic fluid that courses through the veins of the aircraft. It's a toxic sludge that burns and can temporarily blind.
Shortly, it'll start burning.
It's tough.
And it won't stop until you clean it off.
Skydroll in the eyes is like getting pepper sprayed, but a whole lot worse.
Working through the burn is not an option.
Here, Willie, you want to work on that? I got to put some castor oil on my face. It's starting to burn.
So Lyle must temporarily abandon his colleagues. Castor oil neutralizes skydroll's burn.
It's around here.
And it's back to work.
Got about 2 inches. It'll come out.
I'm gonna need help pushing it all the way up first, and then I'll try to hold it.
With one last heave of the tail flap, they finally pry the 90-kilogram actuator free.
Be careful, Lyle. All right, Howard. Let it down a little.
Okay. Let it down, Howard. Glad that's done.
The grueling removal is a lesson learned for the next actuator, and the 8 more after that.
All right, Howard, you got it?
They remove the rest in half the time and with half the muscle.
All right, down. Bring them down. Come on down. Hold on. All right. Oh, yeah. Watch your door.
Each large actuator is worth between $5,000 and $10,000. They remove 10 of them for a total of roughly $80,000. But they are still $100,000 away from their goal. And crunch time is near. The Jumbo now sits in full view of its fate. Across the way, an MD-80 gets crushed into scrap metal. All of its reusable parts have been salvaged, and anything left gets handed over to Julio Estrada from the Alameda Metals Scrapping Company. Julio's scrapper blade crushes with 90,000 kilograms of pressure.
Oh, I like my chopper. Just destroy it. Take the airplanes apart.
It takes 2 days to turn a plane like this into a pile of metal. But the MD-80, as big as it is just a warm-up compared to the giant 747. A plane's remains may look like garbage, but they'll give this heap of scrap another shot at life. Drivers take the metal to the Allied Metal Company in Chicago, where it's melted down. The challenge is to separate the aluminum from other pieces of scrap. A high-powered magnet rotates all the metal. The less magnetic aluminum rolls off, while iron sticks to the drum until it's moved over to its own bin. From here, they take the iron to its own smelter for recycling, while the clean aluminum heads to the furnace. Inside, gas-fired ovens heat the metal to temperatures up to 1,000 degrees. In just 4 minutes, each 450 kilograms of scrap is an aluminum bath. Workers pour the liquid metal into 550 kilogram molds, or 10 kilogram ingots. They'll make 5,000 to 6,000 of these high-grade metal bars from Aeroturbine's Jumbo and reclaim a total of $30,000. The mechanics have now gone inside, outside, and up high to salvage valuable airplane parts. Now, for the first time, they look below. 5 sets of landing gear extend from the plane's belly and wings. They must be removed, but the question is how? They must still keep the plane up and balanced. But with so many components removed, the 747's balance is already off. Roger has a solution. He decides to cut off the tail. He calculates this should stabilize the CG, or center of gravity. Julio's shears can tear through 5-centimeter thick steel with one bite. And the mechanical jaws can open wide enough to crunch a ½ meter at a time. Julio makes an incision all the way around the tail. Then, it drops to the ground. They stabilize the rest of the plane with two types of jacks. Metal ones, which will be spared, and disposable supports made from wooden railway ties. Sledgehammers wedge the beams in as tight as possible. But some beams are rotted, and others not as solid as they'd hoped. No one knows how well they'll hold under the 747's enormous weight.
You got to make sure everything is level. You don't want these to start teetering, because if it's not level, and it's all it's going to do is start breaking its way down.
With all the supports firmly in place, the team has temporary peace of mind to remove the landing gear. The mechanics get to work removing the giant bolts, but it's not easy.
Down slow.
The weight of the plane is on those bolts, so they must lift and push from above, below, and inside until those bolts have no pressure on them at all. Only then can they be undone. It's a grueling process. But in 2 days, all the landing gear is out. Each set will be resold for a total of $50,000. The fuselage now rests solely on its jacks. Julio and his two colleagues now move into the plane. With the tail off, they essentially have one big door for removing different recyclables.
We separate everything. We separate the wire, the insulation, and the aluminum.
The 747's passenger cabin was more than double the size of any of its contemporaries when it was built in 1968. It stretches 6 meters across and encloses 850 cubic meters. The length of the Wright brothers' first flight in 1903 could have been performed within the economy section. Once they've removed the inside of this plane, they even strip the 452 seats and set the metal aside for recycling. What's left of the fuselage looks ready to scrap, but not so fast. A serious safety hazard hides in the tail.
I need this move.
Super heavy counterweights made of depleted uranium. In flight, they help stabilize the aircraft, but if they are not carefully removed, they could become radioactive.
I don't need enough room around the uranium because it's fine. It's non-radioactive until you cut across it, and with the heat, it'll make it radioactive.
Environmental Health and Safety Manager Anne-Marie Stilson will send the depleted uranium to a licensed handler.
It's the good eco-conscious way to get rid of it, as opposed to just throwing it in a scrap metal pile. This is smelted down, and if it did get smelted down, it would cause radioactive activity, and it could get pretty serious.
Another serious hazard may still sit in the giant fuel tanks. They can hold 193,000 liters and must be completely empty of liquid and gas before scrapping begins. There is only one way to know for sure if they're clear. Crawl inside. It's a tight squeeze. But once inside, the size of the 747 tanks is a welcome surprise.
These 47s are far roomier than what these guys are used to. Center tanks. You can stand in there.
"188-centimeter tall mechanic Lyle walks through the tanks with ease.
And I'm in here checking out the levels inside the tank here with our sniffer that we have, checking the oxygen levels and the CO2 levels.
When Julio crushes this tank later in the demolition, sparks are bound to fly. Any residual fuel or fumes could cause an explosion. But after careful inspection,
And there's no fuel in here, it's dry.
Lyle gives it the all clear. What remains of the Jumbo is now set to be crunched.
Pete, you gonna do that one?
This is a grand finale with a perilous edge. The mechanics must get their metal jacks out of the way one at a time. Soon, only the makeshift wooden jacks will support the aircraft, but they may not hold for more than a few seconds.
I'm going to loosen these jacks and pull it out real quick. Well, I'm basically going to let the air out and run because I don't know if it's going to fall or what it's going to do, so. Go. Good to go. Take it all the way.
With less and less support, the aircraft will come crashing down at any moment.
Yeah, it's going to be a good show no matter how it goes.
Each jack released makes the plane less stable. It is the most delicate procedure and extremely dangerous.
Go, 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 go. Come on. Come on, come on. Let's go, let's go.
The metal of this old Jumbo buckles as it settles on the makeshift towers. But it doesn't fall. The railway ties creak, groan, and splinter, but the wooden beams hold. The crew that spent the past 12 weeks pulling apart and recycling this plane can stand back and watch at a safe distance.
Awesome. That's awesome. I didn't think the shearing would hold that long. That did better than we expected.
But it must come down for workers to get underway with the next stage of recycling. So, Julio Estrada moves in with his powerful hydraulic claw. And finally, now, Julio's blade rips into the 747 like a hungry carnivore. The crunching process may look haphazard, but there's a method to the destruction.
He does have an art. I can watch what he does, and there's a purpose to what he's doing, but that's his specialty. Once the aircraft is on the pad, he's in command.
Julio wants all metal and little else. He smashes out all the windows. Next, he slices through the length of the entire fuselage. Then flips over the top like it's a hard-boiled egg. As he guts and plucks from the center of the plane, he separates metals into different piles of aluminum, steel, wire, and copper. The mechanics who labored on this 747 teardown over the past 12 weeks stand and watch the remains reduced to scrap.
Kind of felt good to mess it up. I usually fix them, you know?
Good airplane. Hated to see it go. All aircraft are different. All have their personalities, just like your car. But there's been airplanes that I've worked on over my years in this business that I would like to see crushed. So.
It takes Julio 8 days to complete the job, 4 times longer than a standard-sized aircraft. The once massive jet has been reduced to a 6-meter by 6-meter pile of junk. The price for this scrap metal? $30,000. That makes a grand total value of $6.8 million in recycled parts. Not bad for an old plane. For the owners, it's a jumbo-sized paycheck. This crew of mechanics faced their first 747 teardown and their biggest challenge ever.
Be careful, Lyle.
The engines they removed are already on another aircraft. Thousands of parts, small and large, are on their way back to service. The metal heads for meltdown. They took away the waste and hazardous material, and no one was hurt. This 747 hit retirement at 24 years old. But these mechanics have proven that with proper recycling, old aircraft never have to die. Their parts can take to the skies for years to come.